happy Labor Day. It's a special edition of the State of Football, part 25, and we are going to bring to you live our NFL cut down / practice squad roster impact and analysis. I am your host, Rick Saratella, for the next hour of power, along with my sidekick, John Murphy. Each and every day, weekdays, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern, of course, broadcasting live from the Jersey Shore and down there in New Orleans. A very eventful weekend, a stressful weekend, John, from a player and agent standpoint, very nerve-wracking. And just like any other business, you're not going to make everybody happy. And this is a tough business. Boy, oh boy, I'll tell you, last time I'm keeping tabs on the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. We've got about 56 guys last time I checked on the rosters. And it's just a friendly reminder what a harsh reality. These guys are so close. The fine line between make it or break it. Before we get into the team by team overview, initial thoughts from the weekend. And welcome. Good morning.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much. We don't take holidays off here. Barely take weekends off. And for a lot of these guys, I think the harsh reality was probably there. A while back. It would be very interesting to see. Talking to if you talk to some young players or agents of younger players, especially guys that were undrafted or mid or late round picks here. We see a lot more of those guys now hitting the street. We saw a lot of them not even getting, the opportunity. But I think you saw teams kind of having the willingness to let upside or potential slide by a little bit temporarily here, for the protection, of their short-term plans. And also you see a lot of teams making sure that at some key positions, you see a lot of extra specialists, on some teams. You see a lot of teams, if you check out, who they're working out, post cuts, kickers, punters, deep snappers, so they're getting a lot of love, this time around because you want to know who the next in line is if you have to bring somebody in. And then something we were just speaking about off the air, the clubs that just know how to do business and kind of can read between the lines of what was going on and how they read the tea leaves, very shrewd moves by certain teams. You saw a lot of teams, temporarily release their deep snapper, the Patriots even releasing both of their kickers, in this scenario. And then, we talked about it the other day, knowing how to maneuver or try to maneuver around the cap the best you can. Well, the Saints tried everything, literally everything they could within the rules to try to add Jadeveon Clowney, including trying to entice one NFL team to take, a second-round draft pick for $5 million in cap space, which I think is a kind of very interesting dynamic to see in the future. Is that something the NFL may change some of their guidelines on? Because it certainly might open up, what's never really been a trade league. There's a lot of hot stove baseball. There's a lot of trades with that in hockey and basketball. NFL has, clearly stayed away from doing that other than the obvious, Brock Osweiler trade several years ago, but that would have made it for some interesting times to see if Jadeveon Clowney had $15 million on the table from both teams, what his final decision would have been. But a clever move by the Saints nonetheless, trying to think outside the box in order to get something done. But I think you see a lot of teams took different approaches to how they got down to their final number.
Yeah, and, this year with the practice squads being expanded to 16 players, veterans being eligible, we'll talk about some of those surprise add-ons. And, the COVID world, the practice squads are more important than ever before. And, for the most part, about 30% of every NFL roster consists of undrafted free agents. And hey, listen, that's where we make our money here at the NFL Draft Bible. So let's dive into it. Let's break down some of these guys. I've been kind of studying these things over the weekend. I'm excited to talk about them now. So let's start off with the AFC East, John. I'll run through the teams here and we'll recap it afterwards. I'm going to go through some of my notable guys. And for the first time in about 2 decades, this conference is considered open. right? It's still Patriots until you knock them off the king of the hill. It's still Patriots, but there's a lot of love out there for Buffalo. A lot of our guests coming on this year and predicting Buffalo to go to the Super Bowl and circle those wagons. By the way, John and I have yet to give our Super Bowl predictions. We'll have them this week before Thursday's kickoff. You'll be surprised, or maybe not, who I select. But Buffalo Bills, Christian Wade, the international running back. International players do not count towards the practice squad. So every NFL roster is allowed to carry one international roster exemption. Not every team exercises that right, but Christian Wade is a guy who's been in camp now the last couple of years, can return kicks. They're trying to develop this young man and bring him along. Wide receiver Duke Williams, he's from the CFL. Trey Adams, the offensive tackle out of Washington, one time a first-round pick consideration. He's a now practice squad guy. And Dane Jackson, the cornerback from Pittsburgh, very solid player there for the Buffalo Bills. Moving right along to Miami, they get rid of Josh Rosen, John, but they announced Ryan Fitzpatrick officially as the starter there. But just in case, they have an insurance policy in Jake Rudock. We were talking about Antonio Callaway, the signing there out of nowhere. They also signed wide receiver Kirk Merritt, the Arkansas State wide receiver, who I think his vertical is like 44.5 inches. Defensive end Nick Coe out of Auburn. Benito Jones there on the defensive front. Dorval Queiroz, a Brazilian guy that we had at the BSN Combine, another one of these international exemption slots. And then Nate Holley, who you're familiar with, of course, from up north there in Canada. Moving over to New England, J.J. Taylor, the slashing running back on the practice squad there. Rashad Berry, athletic tight end out of Ohio State, one of the overlooked players coming out of Columbus this year with that talented group. Miles Bryant, undersized corner from Washington, but this dude is a solid cover man. And then you talked about the kickers. New England getting creative here. As far as I know, they do not have a kicker on the active roster. So they've kind of created an extra spot on their 53-man until kickoff time. But they will bring Nick Folk and Justin Rohrweiser, their draft pick there. And I guess they will decide on Saturday before kickoff who to promote there. And, of course, the New York Jets, who are in need of playmakers. Now, they got the running back there in Josh Adams stashed from Notre Dame. But, John, we talked about the lack of playmakers, and you see Lawrence Cager, the Georgia/Miami player, Josh Malone out of Tennessee 2 years ago, Dante Moncrief, a veteran wide receiver. So 3 receivers on the practice squad. Javelin Guidry, the Utah corner, I think he ran a 4.29 at the combine, and they bring back Lamar Jackson, the other Lamar Jackson out of Nebraska, after cutting him, a guy who could play corner, who could play free safety, and Greg Williams will probably like his versatility there. And so there are your AFC East notable practice squad additions, John.
Yeah, so I think you see teams went in different directions based on kind of where they're at, right? Like in terms of where they're expected to be strong. They kind of doubled down, and some other teams did some interesting, things, just in terms of, you see, here the Bills, they've had some issues with the O-line, so, they not only keep Trey Adams, who they got this year after the draft, but bring back, Victor Salako, who's kind of bounced around a couple of squads, but has a good reputation, and is a swingman. And then you keep a kid like Evan Bond around who can play multiple spots inside. Brian Cox Jr., we know all about his pedigree. Again, another young guy that's played a little bit of football, and could get you through. The same could be said for Justin Zimmer. Andre Smith, who they acquired off, was either a late trade or waivers from Carolina, but the connection to their club. So he makes sense. He's connected to them, more of a special teams guy, but he's learned the defense and knows the defense they're playing in, and so you see again, what did they go with? They go with a lot of guys that know their system, and go with a lot of people that can fill in, short term. So I think you see the Bills looking at the COVID stuff heavily there. The Dolphins, on the other hand, they make the move. They get rid of Rosen. Ruddock is a very good number 3, carry the clipboard, learn the offense. So, that it kind of explains, why to do that. The Kurt Merritt kid, I thought, had a very good season at Arkansas State. So good young developmental receiver. And then they swing for the fences with Antonio Callaway, who's not yet 100% cleared. I think he has 3 games left, that need to be covered from that past suspension. And he's about 85, 90% cleared through his medical from the injury he suffered in the XFL. So very interesting, that a guy that's local, that's around, that has clearly better than, $12,000, paycheck that he's going to get. But smart, savvy move there by a club that's, looking for that next tier weapon, and could be a guy, you have an injury and he's ready to go late in the season. If that's your replacement, that's a heck of a replacement, off the practice squad. And a couple of others, Hubbard as a 4th or 5th tackle, that's a good move. Couple of really sharp, younger defensive players. Nick Coe at one time thought of to be a high draft pick. Jashawn Render, we all heard that story. Bill Belichick, skipping early week of the Senior Bowl to go down there and watch this kid work out. Benito Jones, very productive SEC player. And then I think the back end, which is something that they've been developing. They have the front end talent. They don't have the depth. So what did they do? Instead of deciding between their young guys, they basically, protected, every single one of them. J.J. Taylor's got a lot of good run in terms of as a potential all-purpose guy down the road. But right now you have one of the best ones in the game in James White. So, a little bit of a roadblock there. Devin Ross, they all kind of took turns, with who was the best receiver of the younger group. Interesting, I'd heard that Mason Kinsley, the Berry College receiver who was with the Titans, is actually going to end up on the Patriots PR. Now, he might be the guy that gets a PR spot when one of the kickers makes their way onto the active roster later on in the week. Typical Patriots, do something different than everyone else. 3 tight ends. I mean, Quisenberry can be a little fullback-ish. Jake Burt, knock on wood that for a kid that's had the number of injuries he's had, that he could get healthy and actually be able to play would be great, to see him finally get a real NFL shot. And Rashad Berry, very athletic. We know they like to play with multiple tight ends. So, of course, they keep multiple tight ends. And they've had several offensive line issues throughout training camp due to the COVID, due to the draft, and things they do. Typical Patriots, they protect no offensive linemen. So where it seems like we think, from the outside perspective, that the O-line is something the Patriots really would be looking at, especially in waivers and in, this scenario. They don't keep any. Clearly, it's not Groundhog's Day, but, during the cuts, one guy who did make it through for the Patriots to the PR was Bill Murray. So nice to see he's still getting work, even at this advanced age. But all joking aside, that kid was super productive at William and Mary. And I'm not just saying that because, my co-partner in Toronto is a William and Mary graduate. It's also the truth. And I think he's a lunch pail dude that would not have been surprising if they had played a regular preseason, if that kid had made their practice roster off of just sheer grit and determination, the way he plays, a lot of heart and determination, and go with a guy that has a much quicker first step than anticipated when you see him on the hoof. He could be a guy like Zach Kerr. He could be a rotational guy one day that you're like, where did that kid come from? It's not surprising that he would to make their PR. Jashawn Bauer, another kid coming back from injury, LSU kid that the Vikings had high hopes for. Nick Thurman, another one, versatility, University of Houston guy that can play a couple of spots along the D-line. Terez Hall as a special teamer. And then you mentioned, here's a very shrewd move by the Patriots. You get to protect an extra player who may or may not have passed through waivers. Nick Falk probably would have, which was a good guess. And Rosswire as a rookie kicker. We saw a lot of teams in the last 2.5 weeks leading up to final cuts, a lot of them being the teams that are like the Patriots, Titans, Buccaneers. A lot of teams, making moves with their kickers, looking for a veteran guy, looking for kind of a, to double down. The Bears did it as well. So not surprising that they would keep both of these guys, as, that Falk did do a very good job for them down the stretch. And obviously they liked a lot of what Rossweiler had done in college, but he had been sporadic in some of those kicking contest days along the way. Joe Flacco being, healthy as he will be to get cleared. The Jets keep 2 quarterbacks. That's not surprising. They dip into the market in terms of keeping Moncrief, who they just signed, and DJ Montgomery, who they signed off the Browns, waivers recently. But Cager and Malone in the second year, 2 SEC guys battling to get on the field. And, it was a very tough weekend to get on the practice roster, unless your last name was Calfusi, in which case every one of those guys made the Jets PR. So it's good that the brothers got to stay together. And I think the Jets did a very similar thing in the back end of their secondary. We all know what Bennett Jackson has done. I thought he's a competent pro that can play. Guidry gives you a backup returner and all that speed that we mentioned, fastest pro day, type 40 time, out there. Zane Lewis, Air Force kid, very steady. And Lamar Jackson, a lot of upside, based off of his size and speed. So clearly a guy that you would have looked at after the draft when they added him, and his name would have kind of poked out at you to see if he would have made their PR. And lo and behold, there he is.
Yeah, well, we're recapping the AFC East here. We're going to move on to the NFC East in just a second. Before we do, John, I'm going to put you on the spot. Working some division predictions here. I'll go first. Listen, I understand the Buffalo hype. Say what you want. I still have my doubts about Josh Allen. Until I see it, then I'll believe it. I love the flashes. I love the glimpses. But I need the consistency. And I do think Stephon Diggs will help because he could just, fling it down the field and play Frisbee with them, kind of like Tyreek Hill. So I do think the potential is there. But when it's all said and done, I'm not going to doubt Cam Newton and Bill Belichick. And they're going to figure it out. We saw it. We saw it last year. They stumbled out of the gates. But they always find a way to figure it out. And with that being said, I think there's one team to make the playoffs out of this division. It will be the division winner. I am going New England. John, you are going?
I think the thing that Buffalo has now is possibly better depth across the board. And that could be the thing. It doesn't all have to be on Josh Allen. I mentioned it the other day. I won't be surprised if some point that Zach Moss, who looks a lot like Frank Gore, looks a lot like a Marshawn Lynch, doesn't take, a lion's share of that running back job. And that's considering how well we saw Devin Singletary play last year. So I think he has some other, areas that he can improve, but the run game, the factor that they added Diggs, that defense being what it is, it doesn't mean that McDermott and them are on the same level as what the Patriots have done. But I think the gap there is that the Patriots have some other areas that we need to see. It's not just the coaching angle of it. Who are these other, secondary weapons for the Patriots? How are they going to line up that backfield, when, Damian Harris is healthy? And then what kind of effect is there? Is there any layover effect that, we've seen all the whole, kind of the honeymoon period here, which is very not Patriot way to be, talking about how good somebody's practicing or, how good somebody looks in their offense or things like that. The first time there's some turnovers or the first time Cam is Cam, how does that whole relationship really play out, when the bullets are shooting for real? I don't believe they're so bad. I don't believe in that part, that they're just falling off the planet. But, I think that there's enough games in there now that were before, no question, they're W's for the Patriots that are a few question marks, on that schedule that could lead the Bills to winning a division. Maybe not with that super 12 or 13 win season, but I think enough depth there across the board, especially how they drafted, to get them over the top this year in terms of the division.
Well, I think 9 or 10 wins probably gets the division done there. So I'm going New England. John, sounds like you're going Buffalo.
Correct.
All right, let's go over to the NFC East, where I think it's a little bit more open than people think. And the Dallas Cowboys, the favorite in Vegas. We'll get to the prediction at the end. Let's go through their practice squad, the notables here that I have. The TCU runner, Seywao Alanula. He's just a big bruising guy. I think, you stash him on the bench, almost like a Trevin Wesco, what the Jets did last year. Just stash him on the bench, figure out, is there a way I can use this guy? Aaron Parker, the wide receiver out of Rhode Island. We all know about Isaiah Coulter. Parker, his cousin and partner in crime there at URI. Amir Dorsey still on the street, but Rhode Island producing some wide receivers. Isaac Alarkin, the offensive tackle, he is the Cowboys international prospect, and we're going to highlight that because NFL Draft Bible will be holding an international showcase in May of 2021 out in London. So we're going to start providing this international prospect coverage. New York Giants, Cooper Rush makes sense. Jason Garrett knows the offense. Let's just bring him in almost as a coach, right, in that quarterback room. Sandro Platzgummer. I'm waiting for one of my Giants beat writer friends to do a story on this guy again with the international slot, a running back here on the practice squad. And then, we saw the Giants receivers go down like flies last year. And quite honestly, the practice squad is looking just as good as some of the guys on the roster. Johnny Holton, you might remember coming out of Cincinnati a couple years ago, impressive receiver there. Benjamin Victor and Austin Mack, the Ohio State duo, also on the practice squad. Kyle Murphy, another one of these Rhode Island guys there in the Northeast. The Giants doing their due diligence in their own backyard because, oh, by the way, Nico Lalos from Dartmouth, the black belt, is making the roster there on the defensive line. So it was good to see him make the roster. Philadelphia, John, we talked about, the teams getting creative. Josh McCown, best job in football. This guy is making out better than Charlie Whitehurst over here collecting cash for. He won't even be holding the clipboard, John. He'll be holding the laptop. He'll be holding the tablet at his home office. That is Josh McCown. Now, they did bring back Craven LeBlanc in the secondary. Elijah Riley, also there, a corner. Matt Leo, their defensive end, is the international slot in Philadelphia. Offensive line is a big concern. Luke Juriga, the center, and then also Prince Tega Wanago, the one-time heralded prospect who's suffered a bunch of injuries. If he can ever get healthy, boy, the potential and upside are certainly there. Deontay Burnett, the wide receiver out of USC, who was an underclassman, I believe, did not get drafted. He now finds himself on the practice squad, similar to the running back Elijah Holyfield, who declared early last year, spent some time with the Panthers. He will spend this year, at least the beginning, with the Eagles, along with Adrian Killins, who I had a chance to see this past season down at UCF, a little smaller, kind of scat, quicker running back there. So the Eagles stockpiling their running backs. And they also signed our guy Jason Huntley out of New Mexico State to the active roster, who was released. And they pick him up. They stash him on the active roster. So the Eagles doing some stashing on running backs. And then last, the Washington Redskins, they have some kind of West Coast scout there with some kind of pull because they found Steven Montez, the Colorado quarterback, and the receiver Troy Brown, both out of Colorado, worthy enough to place on their roster. Joshua Garnett, remember him out of Stanford, the offensive guard. He is now on the practice squad. And one of the top international prospects is defensive end David Bada. Make sure you remember that name. He'll be there, as well as Jordan Brailford from Oregon State, I believe. 14 sacks this past year, something to that effect. And rounding it out, the veteran corner there in Aaron Colvin for the Washington Redskins. So, again, John, I think that aside from, I hate to say it, aside from the New York Giants, I think any team can win this division. I think the Giants and Redskins are more in that rebuilding phase, and Dallas is ready to win now, right? And Philadelphia, they did win the Super Bowl just a few years ago. You can't count them out, although I think Philadelphia is looking like some Swiss cheese right now. There's holes all over that roster, so I think they have quite a bit of work to make up to get back to that kind of stature. Those are my notables here for the NFC East. How do you see it, my friend?
Yeah, so I think, when you look at what Dallas did there, protect the areas that they see as most vulnerable, to themselves. They protect the center. We all know that they lost their center to retirement and kind of have some moving parts there. Defensively, pass rush, is something that they think is the key to their success. Rondell Carter got one of the biggest, if not the biggest, guaranteed amounts of money, post-draft, so they keep him and double down with Ladarius Hamilton. Francis Bernard, very athletic linebacker who they see as a guy that can crack their roster as a special teamer sooner than later. Justin Hamilton has bounced around a lot of clubs, but he's a good, steady guy. If you need to dress in an emergency and get him in there, he'll do the right things. He just may not be flashy enough, to make any real plays, but he will, be a sound, which is very important if you're going to have a guy have to dress. Where have they had their most issues? They lose their best corner in free agency. Their second best one is on IR. So literally they protect all of their young guys and then keep, Savion Smith, who's a little older, and then get Brandon Carr, who knows the team knows him, knows what kind of guy they're getting. Will not be surprising when Brandon Carr has to dress and play. And the interesting thing with that Siwo kid is that they're hoping he has a really interesting height, weight, speed combination, really athletic for a plus 235-pound back. And there were some people that were hoping to look in the preseason at him as kind of that combo running back, fullback. Can they give him some of the physical parts of the game as a fullback and teach it to him? Be very interesting to see. Like, that was the guy that they decided to keep over the other running backs that were kind of pure running backs, that they had in camp. So it'll be interesting to see if they think about kind of continuing that development of Siwo as, kind of a combination third running back, fullback, special team combination guy. So I think they did an interesting job of protecting in the areas that they really need to the most. And then also added Malik Turner, who was cut by Seattle, who was in camp with Green Bay, but a productive kind of fifth receiver type. As again, they have some high-end guys, but they're middle and depth, at that position, not as competent as you would want for a team that's expecting a deep playoff run. So he's a good late addition to them via waivers. Like what the Giants did, you have Derek Dillon, who has a lot of speed from LSU. Benjamin Victor, we mentioned him and what he looked like at times, at Ohio State. Keep the two young guys on the back end. And then they're a club that, Joe Judge, special teams, and what does he do? Protect the kicker and a deep snapper and a kicker punter, at that, who likely would have won one of those jobs for the Montreal Alouettes had the CFL season started on time. So he's a late opt-out from a CFL contract, who makes an NFL practice roster. So count one guy who got a, kind of bump up from the COVID, situation going there. And then Carson Tinker, Alabama deep snapper. Where was Joe Judge? Figure it out, and Carson Tinker ends up on there. Needless to say, this is one of the teams that, no pun intended, will be tinkering with their practice roster on the regular, just based on what's on the current roster. You could see a lot of these guys, like you mentioned, the Giants, a lot of these kids will probably be afforded an opportunity at some point. Eagles, very balanced. Won't be surprising if Prince Tago Wanongo is not one of the first guys that somebody tries to poach at some point in time. Offensive lineman who could probably, fill in as a guard tackle somewhere. Needs a lot of extra work in terms of where he is at the college level to be a successful guy in the pros. That's where he kind of needed some work, but a guy that a lot of teams will kind of keep their eye on, and they protect one at every level, kind of, very well-balanced, deal there. They keep one of their own, and Burnett, the same thing with Holyfield, but then double down and keep a Killins kid who looks very much like the kind of, all-purpose guys they've had on the active roster in the past. Travis Fulgham, who did a very good job in camp with the Lions last year, but then when the lights went on and he got an option to play, not so much. So it'll be interesting, to see what he can do there. And then Trevor Williams and Joe Osman are the two guys on the back end that in all likelihood would see the first action if they play. Redskins, they obviously have a real trust in there, like you mentioned, who's looking at the guys Out west, Montez did some good things in the postseason. I think that earned him a look. Tony Brown was, I think, this is his third team already, as a young player. So there's obviously something that people want, to look at. Josh Garnett, as we mentioned, a journeyman O-lineman, but not a bad thing to have in this, day and age. And the Ross Perchbacker kid is a good enough center to play if you ever have Hells Bells at center and you need a guy to play. Nate Orchard, good pass rusher, been a kind of a fourth, fifth D end everywhere he's been, but, good to have a guy like that around. And then not surprising that on the back end, they went with a little more veteran experienced guy like Colvin, so, hey, I think this is a very interesting division based on the factor that with Ron Rivera and the coaching staff and the factor that they doubled down and went all in on Haskins, and then, bless you, went in on, going with the young guys in the backfield. They have McLaurin, who has a chance. They've gotten rid of some of the headaches, and some of the veteran guys that maybe were having a voice in the room, but was it always the right voice at this stage of the game, for them. For the Redskins, I think it's their defense. The defense has to show up early to allow that offense to gel and play well. The Eagles, okay, yeah, you got rid of Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas, but I don't see a back end right now that I'm fearful of with Will Parks out 4 to 6 weeks. And the factor that, when you get rid of Sidney Jones and Sharif Miller, like you're talking about high draft picks, who's fundamentally filling in for those guys? Their depth at the back end, linebacker, and in the secondary is a little suspect, to also say that your O-line depth is a little suspect. This might be a division that the amount of wins expected out of the division winner could end up being severely less based on, each one of these teams. And with the Cowboys, it's their schedule. I mean, they're out the box playing, I think, 3 out of the first 4 weeks or 4 out of the first 4 weeks, against last year playoff teams, and some pretty good ones at that. That first game at the Rams might be the easiest W in the first month of the season for them. So how do they play, and what's the result of those games early? I think this is a good division that could be won with 10 games, and that's why I think even with some of the questions I have about them, I still think there's too much talent in Dallas to say that the other teams can pass it up. And if they do, it's going to mean that it's a 9 or 10 win season, and it's because Washington and or the Giants upset the apple cart by doing better than splitting with those two teams. If you're Washington or the Giants, you got to at least escape winning at least one out of those games against the Eagles and the Cowboys. And whoever between the Eagles and Cowboys does not fare well against the playoff teams on your schedule and then drops a bad game against Washington or the Giants at home or on the road, that team could be in trouble, because I'm not sure you get 2 teams out of this division into the playoffs.
I would agree with that. I actually see just about all these teams winning somewhere between 7 to 9 games. So to your point, if somebody can pull out 10, I'm going to go with Dallas here. Are you in agreement? Dallas. Okay. NFC East in the books. We'll get our Super Bowl predictions here before the kickoff on Thursday. Tomorrow, by the way, we've got a star-studded show. We'll have Adrian Terzoli from the NFL Draft Bible. We also have Cam Gill of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who made that roster as an undrafted guy. We'll have Ryan Roberts join us again from NFL Draft Bible, along with Dane Brugler to close it out. Oh, by the way, did I mention we have Craig Haley from the FCS Stats? So tomorrow, jam-packed. Wednesday, we have some guests lined up, and then Thursday, Aaron Wilson from the Houston Chronicle. So we've got a star-studded week. Make sure you keep it locked here on the NFLDraftBible.com. We go to the AFC North now, John, where the Baltimore Ravens look like one of the best teams, if not the best team on paper. I'm just going to write them in for the both of us now, unless you tell me otherwise when we get to the end of it. I'll kick it off with the Ravens. Tyler Huntley, the Utah quarterback, who I thought really showed some strides down the stretch of the season. The more I watched him, the more I liked. And so, here's a guy that kind of sits behind Lamar Jackson, RG3, and try to develop him. Eli Wolf, maybe a poor man's Mark Andrews there. Jarrell Adams, the former draft pick out of South Carolina, stashing those tight ends is what Baltimore likes to do. Two guys from the NFLPA Bowl, Chauncey Rivers, the edge rusher, and Nigel Warrior from Tennessee, a very good playmaking safety. Over to the Cincinnati Bengals, John, I was a little bit surprised. They released Jacob Dolegala, and they re-signed Brandon Allen to the practice squad. So Dolegala out of work here as far as I know it. Couple of wide receivers, Stanley Morgan out of Nebraska, Scottie Washington out of Wake Forest. I always felt like Scottie Washington was more of that Darren Waller mold where I would put, 15 pounds on him and maybe move him to tight end. And maybe they will because they also have Mitchell Wilcox, the South Florida tight end who participated at the East-West Shrine game. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns. Garrett Gilbert, staying alive, the old Lee Steinberg client there. Dontrell Hilliard, the running back you're familiar with, John. Benny LeMay also getting signed to that Cleveland practice squad. LeMay out of Charlotte, Hilliard out of Tulane, I believe. Brady Aiello, I always called him the fifth Beatle there on that Oregon offensive line. Didn't really have a starting spot, but was able to play, fill in where needed, left tackle, right tackle, guard. A lot of good versatility. I liked Brady Aiello. I mean, he really held his ground at the NFLPA Bowl. I mean, he was one of the more impressive players, and we were kind of talking about his prospects and, hey, he never really got a lot of playing time, but how did he look out here? He looked like a really good player. So I'm not surprised that a team wants to work with him. Javonte Moffitt, here's a safety now. I think it was UCF, but, we had the 2018 film was outstanding. The 2019 film, not so good. Perfect example as to a guy that played through injury, sacrificed, his cause for going out there playing hurt, put some poor film down this past year, but he gets into camp and really proves his worth. Javonte Moffitt, shout out to him. And then we winded up with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who really, at the end of the day, I think, Cleveland, they're just a bunch of wanksters as far as I'm concerned. Pittsburgh actually has a legitimate shot. Deion Kane, the former Clemson wide receiver who never panned out, he finds his way onto the practice squad. Anthony Coyle, our Fordham offensive lineman, good to see him making the practice squad there. And you'll see, offensive line, obviously a concern here for the Steelers because they also have Derwin Gray, the Maryland offensive lineman who's played tackle, probably projects as guard. And then Jaron Jones, who's kind of been bouncing around the league. The Giants had him in camp, the former Notre Dame defensive tackle who has now converted over to offensive tackle. And on the defensive side for the Steelers, Daniel McCullers, you might remember him coming out of Tennessee. He's a wide load now. He's pushing close to 400. So he's just a space eater there. And then Antoine Brooks, the safety out of Maryland, again, back to that Maryland wishing well. Pittsburgh has done their due diligence at Maryland. They always seem to find the prospects coming out of there, even though Sean Davis no longer on the roster. They always have a strong presence there at the Maryland Pro Day. So again, John, I am going with the Baltimore prediction, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Your thoughts on the practice squad here in the AFC North?
Yeah, so clearly no preseason, didn't allow Huntley to kind of see how that would have played out against Trace McSorley. Had a feeling McSorley would make the roster in some way, shape, or form. So good that Huntley gets to stick around. That's a perfect spot for him to compete at and learn in that offense if he's going to play in the NFL. You mentioned it, they like tight ends, so they stick with it. Eli Wolf has kind of bounced around, made it to the Saints for a minute and then, ends up here. So good spot. For him, Chauncey Rivers fits as a versatile pass rusher, and you saw they double down there, keeping Iodele as well. Christian Welch, I think, as a backup guy and a special teamer, good fit. And then again, they've made some moves. We all know the major moves they made on their back end, so to double down on a couple of guys, that might have similar abilities, to play in a role player, special teams, job. You mentioned Nigel Warrior, and I think he's a guy that, will overplay, in terms of maybe not the best tester in the world, but, on game day, if he gets a chance and gets in the action, it won't be surprising to see him hold on to a roster spot long term. Bengals, not as surprising. I think, again, you can blame a lot of things on COVID, and that's probably Brandon Allen, right? He's a little more experienced, has some game action under his belt. They protect Jock Patrick, who played in the XFL. Stanley Morgan knows their system, so there you go. With a good reason to hold on to a guy that knows your system. DN, they keep 3 guys, Bledsoe and Futrell. Good college production. Yet to see really what you could do at the NFL level. But again, the versatility of having guys that can play a number of spots, and then protecting Khalil McKenzie, who's now bounced around, and multiple teams are trying him as a combo guy, as kind of an emergency O lineman to go along with his defensive tackle prowess that he played in college. Winston Rose, another guy from the CFL who makes it, led the CFL in interceptions. So you see him make it there. Was a good scheme fit, for them. They did a lot of homework on him. They really recruited him hard. So not surprising to see them keep him around. Cleveland, same thing. They're a very balanced practice roster. You have a guy that's taking snaps, and if needed, if they lose a quarterback, they're covered there. Dontrell Hilliard came down to a decision there, but a good all-purpose back that can do a little bit of everything. Jamarcus Bradley, super productive at ULL. You see what kind of linemen they like. Dunn and Aiello, very long, lean, body type guys that can protect you at, either tackle or guard. Montrell Meander, transfer kid, was at Grambling, is a super athletic kid that, was a strong safety in college, now trying to be, moved into kind of that nickel backer, scenario, but could see him get on the field, as a special teamer with an injury. AJ Green, not the AJ Green that's making real money, but this AJ Green, who was their highest paid undrafted free agent, kind of surprising that he got cut. They cut a number of DBs, but then double down and keep him and Robert Jackson. And then, Cody Parkey, they're one of the teams that have been kind of kicking the tires, just to make sure that the other kicker in the building was already sort of in the building in case something happens. So no surprise to see them add one. Steelers definitely think they're going to be in contention at worst for a playoff spot. If not, them thinking, with everyone back healthy, they're hoping Juju Smith-Schuster bounces back and Connor, gives them the, ground game, that they've had. They have good depth at the running back position. They have a competent offensive line. They've played very well on the defensive side of the ball. It just is a question of, hey, what's going to be left in the tank with Big Ben? And those games against the Ravens clearly is something where the Steelers need at worst a split. But if they're really going to be true contenders, they have to look for the sweep, there. And you can't have bad games, the way that they've had, the past couple of years. But they protect themselves at receiver, 2 guys that can also play special teams. Trey Edmonds, a good body back, in terms of not ever really seeing the ball at the NFL level, but does a good job on special teams. They know where their money is made, O-line, D-line. Jaylen Elliott is an interesting kid. He's bounced around a bunch of teams and flashed in the XFL as a pass rusher. Perfect scheme fit for them. And Curtis Riley, a competent guy in the back end that, if they need somebody to play on game day, has good experience. I'm with you. I think the Ravens' depth is tremendous. I think them and the Colts have as good a depth, top to bottom, and, their backups and even some of their third stringers on both of those teams are really, really competent. I think I want to see what has been their development this offseason with how do you get over the hump when somebody does stop that ground game? How do you now add the next element? We saw Lamar Jackson year 1 to year 2, but we've seen a lot of guys do well year 1 to year 2 using the skills that he has. Now, what do we do going into this season to close the gap on those teams defensively that when it comes time for the playoffs kind of shuts down those 3-pointers, right? Shuts you into playing a different style of football. How do the Ravens play when that is the style of play and somebody's punching you in the mouth? What's your counter reaction to that after what you saw last year in that game against the Titans. And I'll say, for a week one contest, there is not a bigger week one contest in the NFL for one particular team than the Cleveland Browns playing against the Ravens. If you go out there week one against the Ravens and let them plow through you the way that it is projected, that's not a really good sign for what's to come out of the Cleveland Browns. Now, if Stefanski and that changed attitude there, if it plays over, the talent level on the front end of the Browns is good enough to compete as long as their front end talent is healthy and on the field. So it'll be really interesting to see the dynamic there of the Ravens knowing how good they are and liking that physical brand of football. How do the Browns stand up to that in the first quarter or the first half of that game? And then what kind of game is that in the second half this Sunday? Because I think that's the difference between the Browns staying in contention during the season or, like you said, proving that they might be as fraudulent as a lot of people think.
Fugazi has a $2 bill. Listen, at the end of the day, the answer to your question is, how do the Ravens respond? We had another running back, J.K. Dobbins. I mean, they might as well run the wishbone, because I'm serious. You could see 3 1,000-yard rushers. I don't know if that's ever happened in the history of the NFL, but you might see it this year with Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, and Mark Ingram. They might all get 1,000 yards rushing. So we'll see how far they can ride that train. Of course, John Murphy, Rick Saratella here each and every weekday on the State of Football, brought to you by the NFLDraftBible.com. Make sure you go check out our virtual draft guide. Already close to 300 scouting reports in the can. You want Big Ten, you want Pac-12, we put them in there along with all the players around the world. So again, NFLDraftBible.com. Make sure you check out our online scouting seminars Wednesdays with Brian Baldinger. We're also bringing Bob Wiley out to break down some offensive line on our next seminar there. Of course, Friday night Scout School with Ryan Roberts and David Turner each and every Friday night. If you're an undrafted player, unsigned player, our free agent database is overseen by Marvin Jones, the New York Jets Marvin Jones, former first-round pick. Definitely get at us, and he can help you out there. And so now we shift gears to the NFC North with a look at their practice squad and predictions. Chicago, John making the announcement that Mitchell Trubisky won the job, not by much, but he won the job there. Nick Foles saying, hey, I'll do whatever it takes to help this team win. I have a feeling we will see Nick Foles sooner rather than later. And oh, by the way, there's a Tyler Bray sighting on the practice squad. Artavius Pierce is a guy out of Oregon State. I always go back to the game a couple years ago where he just ran through that Ohio State Buckeyes defense, frontwards, backwards, sideways. He was the fastest player on the field that day. He since had an injury, but you know what? I think this is a guy, again, should something happen to Tariq Cohen, Pierce is a guy that could come in and spell that kind of role. Jesper Horsted, the former Princeton wide receiver, he is now playing tight end there for the Bears. I think he could be a huge, huge red zone weapon, sort of be the player that Adam Shaheen hasn't developed to be. So Jesper Horsted, remember that name. Sam Mustipher, Notre Dame, offensive lineman. LaCale London, Western Illinois, the Leathernecks, under the radar, very athletic, mobile, and agile is that LaCale London. Excuse me. Detroit Lions, John. David Blau from Thanksgiving fame. He gets released. Somewhat of a surprise, but they bring him back to the practice squad. Jonathan Williams, the running back out of Arkansas, he's kind of been bouncing around the league the last couple years, as has wide receiver Tom Kennedy. Shout out to our NEC friends there. Bo Benschweisel, the Wisconsin offensive lineman who just really had his lunch handed to him, I thought, at the Senior Bowl. He just looked overwhelmed, overmatched, which is a good reason why he didn't get drafted. One of the few guys there from the Senior Bowl who did not get drafted. He winds up on the practice squad, as does Frank Heron from LSU. This guy has got so much nasty to him. It's hard to part ways with this Frankie Heron. He just finds a way to stick around. Jaylen Elliott, the safety out of Notre Dame, rounds out the Lions notables. for me, Green Bay, they've got some intriguing players here. I really liked what they did. The guy, Reggie Bagleton, up north, John can talk more to him. But John Lovett, the former Princeton quarterback, he's not as big as Tyson Hill, but he will play that kind of role, I would anticipate. They're not bringing John Lovett in there to play quarterback, but John Lovett is a guy that's really an intriguing skill set. Just an athlete. Again, find a role. Is he a Trey Burton type? I don't know. Just find a way to use this guy. Zach Johnston, the offensive lineman. Willington Prevalon. Prevalon, you say Prevalon, I say Prevalon. But the Rutgers defensive tackle, I went into the school there and they said, listen, if this guy was playing at a major program, there'd be such a buzz about him. I went in and saw him. He plays a little bit upright. But, man, he can take on those double teams. He can make himself skinny and make a presence there on the Green Bay defensive front. Chris Barnes, the UCLA linebacker, really liked his film coming out. Doesn't do anything special, doesn't possess any elite traits, but when you turn on the film, he just constantly shows up around the ball. Tipa Galai from Utah, there's some off-the-field baggage there, but he will get a chance with the Green Bay Packers. And then over to the Minnesota Vikings, they've got Kirk Cousins there. But just in case, Nate Stanley, who I think they selected there late in the draft, he makes the practice squad. Jake Browning, the former Washington quarterback, is there. Blake Brandell, another one of these. There you go. Stanley in the 6th and Brandell. Those are both late round draft picks that they wind up releasing and then bringing back to the practice squad. Brandell, a 4-year starter at Oregon State. Kyle Hinton out of Washburn. Very athletic guy who could play all 3 interior positions. So a lot of value there on the practice squad. And then Josh Metellus, another one of these Senior Bowl guys, John, the safety out of Michigan, who winds up going undrafted and being placed on the Vikings practice squad. So there is your NFC North. I'll let you run through those teams, and then we'll get a prediction out of you.
Yeah, so probably won't be too long until there's a quarterback conversation again in Chicago. When you don't pick up the 5th year, when you don't pick up the option, you're not really sure what you want to do with the guy. That's probably, I think that's the best move. What Foles' mental approach to the game is. And, if you got to bring him in the first half of game 1 or it doesn't happen until week 7 or 9, you're going to get the same guy. I don't think you would necessarily think right now that Mitch Trubisky off the bench would be the best way to do things. So I think you have to trust that why you drafted him, what you saw when you were using him in a different manner that led to success. Have you put all of that back into place and then hit the reset button and make him and everybody else believe that with our defense, and with what we have here, the veterans on that offensive line, and Allen Robinson on the outside and a little bit of Tariq Cohen. And then when you get Montgomery back, you have a guy that can gain 4 or 5 yards on first down if you hand it off. That's the way to go at first. And if not, don't worry, we have a veteran Nick Foles here, to kind of help us out and get us back on track. You mentioned a couple of the young guys there. I think they did an excellent job. I mean, their offensive line, basically protected every guy that they've, drafted or signed. There, Jamin Brown gives them a guy immediately off the bench. Latavius Simmons was a kid that I thought has a really good development, prospects. And, you mentioned LaCal London and another one, Steven Denmark, who looked like he had made the team, last year, off of how he had played. So their back end, guys are covered there, and Xavier Crawford, real good height, weight, speed. And then they, another team that doubled down on the kicker. So Panero knows that he may have, won the job and had it last year, but having Cairo Santos in the building at least gives them a guy that if something goes wrong, they're immediately protected there. Lions did a lot of the same, protect a, veteran running back, a quarterback that knows your system, Bolden, who can double down as a returner, keep the development going with Tom Kennedy. Kenny Wiggins, I'll say this for Kenny Wiggins. Boy, every single year he's on a roster. Kenny Wiggins finds a way to make an NFL team every year, and it's versatility, and it's the fact that he just grinds his way, to knowing how to play if you have to play him. You mentioned the thing on Heron. They got a couple of guys there like that. Wiggins is one. Jonathan Williams, Heron, Anthony Pittman, a local kid, that can play well on special teams, and Jaylen Elliott, another one. And they really liked Bobby Price, who they signed as an undrafted free agent. So, again, they do a little bit of both where they hang on to some guys to develop in Price and Kennedy and then hold on to some veterans, like Wiggins and Heron, and Jaylen Elliott. So good job there by the Detroit. It's really just winning football games there. You mentioned Crockett. He had a really good camp last year with the Texans and then had a couple of fumbles that made them a little kind of gun shy with them. Beggleton is a kid who I think has the ability to continue to grow on them. You've already gotten the confidence of the quarterback. It's really now they held on to their draft picks, the guys that they've invested in longer. Him and Shepard, you saw Shepard kind of unfortunately not play well when the lights went on last year, but he does have some good physical traits. Lovett's a really good football player. Won't be surprising to see him get active at some point. And they kept guys who could rush the passer. Delonte Scott can get after it. Greg Roberts can get after it. And the one thing you'll have to say, we mentioned it in terms of one team with their West Coast, these guys really must like and trust the guys that are scouting for the Packers in the South or Southwest, there, because you look at their guys that they kept, Delonte Scott, SMU, Greg Roberts and Henry Black, both from Baylor, and Beggleton is originally from Lamar University. So a lot of Texas connection there, which, used to be thanks to Alonzo Highsmith, when he had that area, Southwest. So, might be Mike Owen. And if it is, shout out to Mike Owen, who's done an excellent job as a scout for the Packers. And I believe that might be his neck of the woods. So not surprising. And just so you know, that's not the Stanford Samuels that was playing 100 years ago. That's actually the junior, so he makes it, not the daddy. We wanted veterans on the back end during COVID, just not 40-plus-year-old veterans. So that's the son, in there playing. Just like if you see a Marvin Jones sighting somewhere, it's probably not Marvin making the roster at this stage. Vikings, the quarterbacks, not surprising. They've invested in Browning, and then they drafted Stanley late, like you mentioned. Alexander Holland's good as a slot receiver, but also a guy that can double as an off returner if need be. They do the expected. They protect all of their offensive line. Not surprising. Blake Lynch as a versatile guy that can back up at, D end or, linebacker. Mark Fields is given a, good, credible, when he's gotten in there. It's just at times, he has to keep to his technique in order to be a solid NFL defender. If not, he's going to be more of a practice roster type guy. But they protected where their bread and butter is, which is they want to develop a young quarterback, and they protected all of their O-line. Man, it's tough. I don't believe that the Packers were as good as where they ended up, last year. I'm not sure that either one, one of these years, Detroit's going to take a step, in the right direction. It won't be this year. The Vikings, again, I'm not totally sold on the Vikings, but I'll defer on the factor, again, with what it seems like is going to be important this year. And I think the total depth of the Vikings is better than the total depth of the Packers. And the Packers have more guys that need to take a step forward to play consistently in order to then match the depth that the Vikings have without a preseason the way that it was normally. I'm not sure that that's it. So I'm torn between those two. I'm leaning toward Vikings over Packers, but neither one has got my full confidence. And it's just I don't believe enough in Chicago being able to consistently put up points offensively. And Detroit, it's just until they prove to you that they can do it over a full season, with this current regime. I like what the GM tried to do. He definitely, was consistent to what his mantra, and his game plan is, but now it's his coaching staff, better not let him down, or else there's going to be a lot of movement again in Detroit.
Yeah, I think both Quinn and Patricia on the hot seat there. They've got to show something. And I'm with you. I don't think it's going to be this year, unfortunately for them. I'm going to double down with you on Minnesota. A lot of people believe the Bears are the best defense in this conference or division. I'm not so sure. We talked about the Vikings. They've got premier talent at every level of that defense, and some levels multiple players. And because of that, I think Kirk Cousins is just good enough to get the job done, but he's also not good enough to lead them to the promised land. So I will go with the Vikings taking that division. Let's flip the script and go over to the AFC South. You're tuned into the NFL Draft Bible with Rick Saratella and John Murphy. We gave our guy Ralph Entry a Monday off due to the holiday, but I am catching some heat on Twitter for my Josh Allen take and my Buffalo Bills sentiment. So the bullets are flying on the Twitterverse already with our predictions. AFC South, John, I think this is another division wide open. Obviously, Tennessee and their acquisition of Clowney, I think, kind of puts them at the forefront. But there's going to be some teams here chopping at the knees. And I'll start off with the Houston Texans, who, oh, by the way, their head coach is handling GM duty, so I wasn't too impressed with their practice squad. Scottie Phillips, the running back there from SEC, CJ Prosise, the veteran guy. We saw them trade for David Johnson, not necessarily the most durable running back. Duke Johnson, I think, is there as well. Again, maybe some injuries looking down the road. So Scottie Phillips and CJ Prosise. Chad Henson, remember him from Cal? He was a couple years with the Jets. Wide receiver, just never panned out. I think it was actually a draft pick. He now finds himself with the Texans, who's kind of pieced together that wide receiver corps over there. Indianapolis, Chad Kelly stays alive and finds a home with the Colts. No surprise there. Frank Wright, go look. He backed up Jim Kelly. There's somewhat of a relationship. Doris Fountain, we saw his pro day kind of put him on the NFL radar a couple years ago. He maintains in the mix. Farad Green is a guy that we had at the NFLPA Bowl that we were excited about, the tight end who did suffer an injury. I didn't really get a chance to see him in person, but I heard so many good things about him. And then the defensive tackle position, where two guys in my neck of the woods, Rob Windsor, who was a mid-round pick there for the Colts out of Penn State, I guess did not show enough to warrant a roster spot, but they keep him on the practice squad. And then our guy Chris Williams, who Terrence Knighton has really coached up there out of Wagner, gets the Shrine game invite, makes the Colts practice squad. Another FCS underdog story. Again, we'll have his teammate Cam Gill on tomorrow's show, who made the Tampa Bay roster as an undrafted free agent as well. Jacksonville. All right, here's a good story. Had a chance to do a spot with my good friend Jody Mack. He said, give me a feel-good story. Give me a guy to keep an eye on. Jake Luton, the 6th-round pick out of Oregon State. John, he beats out Mike Glennon, a former 3rd-round pick. He beats out Joshua Dobbs, a former 4th-round pick. Jake Luton is now the backup to Gardner Minshew. I have a surprise feeling here that you might see Jake Luton start a handful of games before it's all said and done. But the Jaguars do bring back Mike Glennon on the practice squad. Terry Godwin out of Georgia. This guy's a speed demon. At some point, he's going to figure it out and find a way to be an effective slot receiver, I believe. Trevor Wallace Sims, I think, out of Missouri there on the offensive line. Amari Henderson, the big, tall Wake Forest corner. I think his physical attributes get him an extended lifeline. Karon Reed, the Princeton defensive tackle, a veteran guy there who's been around on the active roster for quite a bit of time. Surprised that he only finds a practice squad spot in Jacksonville. That is Karon Reed. And then Tennessee, listen, Trevor Siemian might be as good of a practice squad quarterback as there is in the entire league. You get a guy with starting experience there, obviously coming off an injury. He's always coming off an injury, that Trevor Siemian is. Quisenberry, they've got the offensive lineman, I think, coming out of San Jose State a few years back. And then again, defensive line, Kobe Smith, the South Carolina defensive tackle, kind of a 2-down run stuffer. Tier Tart, FIU, I believe, who flashed, talk about some wow plays out at the Collegiate Bowl in Pasadena. Tier Tart, he was either way up here or way down here, needs to get some more consistency. But again, just physical, explosive, athletic, strong. This guy's squatting, just, benching and squatting incredible numbers in the weight room. He's a workout warrior. And then Kareem Orr, I believe, out of TCU, who I liked coming out a few years ago. So I will go here with my prediction, John. You know what? I love Tennessee. I really think they are the favorite. But, I got to go Indianapolis. To your point, the depth. This team was set up to win. I really had them winning. I had them going to the Super Bowl until Andrew Luck retired about 13 months ago. And I really believe that Rivers, while I don't know that Rivers can take them to the Super Bowl, I think he's going to give them a shot here. So I'm going to go with Indianapolis and turn it over to you.
Well, so, we look here, and you mentioned, the Texans are clearly, again, a team that is in win now mode. They kind of go a little sideways in terms of, they protect one of their backs that they had and then go in a totally different direction. And we've seen there's plenty of reasons why CJ Prosise was on the workout tour, during training camp. Obviously has the size, height, weight, speed that teams would look for out of that, all-purpose back. He's got the ability to catch the ball, run routes out of the backfield, double down as a off returner as well. It's just putting it all together and getting a chance. So it'll be interesting to see, if they are kind of using him to develop in that, Duke Johnson type role so that he doesn't have to jump on the field right away. Clearly they're an offense that is, everything's complicated in the NFL. Bill O'Brien, very precise, type guy, and route running and knowing and how to do your job on game day is, clearly paramount to them. So both Chad Hansen and Stephen Mitchell, guys that have been around, they protect their offensive line, at every level. Gerald Hawkins and Elijah Nenska are both guys that have really good athletic ability for long levered offensive linemen. So I think they kind of double down on their protection. And then Greg Mance inside. The West Georgia kid is an interesting – he is a big dude, and somebody I kind of had circled that, again, given a preseason game, or given, preseason film, I think that kid would attract to being on a PR, so not surprising there. And then, two positions that they've done very well in developing over time, Davin Bellamy, as an outside backer, but, kind of as a – pass rusher versatility there, was a defensive end recruited to Georgia, can play outside backer based on his athletic ability. And Jonathan Owens, who had one of the best pro days several years ago, Missouri Southern kid who had just a tremendous height, weight, speed combination. It could be, used in a variety of roles there. So not surprising to see him kept. And there's a lot of talent on the Colts PR, which shows you, the guys that made their team, they were able to slide Chad Kelly through, there, Darius Fountain out of Northern Iowa. They like the athletic ability of Farad Green, and then Xavier Grimble has done a good job as both a receiver, and as a blocker. Carter O'Donnell, a Canadian kid that they spent a lot of time and effort evaluating. Not a surprise there for them to continue to develop a tackle. That's kind of one of the areas they've wanted the last 2 years to find some younger guys to develop at tackle. When you look at the age on their guys on the outside, Joey Hunt, just a competent interior lineman, and this year that could be worth its weight in gold. And then they double down on protecting almost all of their younger D-line. Chris Williams, as you mentioned, very interesting. Like their whole front. Cam Gill's making it. Chris Williams is making it, and Julian McLeod would have made the Argos. So, I mean, really, you look at three guys on Wagner's front. So Ralph may not like what we're saying about Josh Allen, but he certainly would like the factor that Wagner over here showing out and, making the NFL. There's a lot of guys from Wagner, making teams, starting off, and Julian Stanfield, kind of at Stanford, kind of kicked off this group the last couple of years where there's a lot of kids there. And I think Ryan Fultz would have had been a pretty good competition out with the BC Lions. So there would have been a number of Wagner, guys playing football. And so it does show you, that you can make it even if you have a subpar assistant commissioner. Sorry, Ralph. The last guy that I'll talk about there is Tremon Smith. That kid has some of the best versatility and pure speed of anybody on a practice roster. It's really just kind of honing his skills and getting him a shot. But, that could be a kid that dresses as a returner and takes one to the house on any given day. And he was a running back at Central Arkansas that they flipped to DB because his size variable just fits so much better there. But when you watch that kid in a workout, he has some really impressive straight line speed. Andre Shasheri is a kid who's kind of teased. He was in camp with the Texans, had kind of up and down film with San Jose State, and in, when he's gotten his chances there with the Texans, but another kid, when you had 6 foot DBs, they're going to get, tons of look. I love the story, that Luton won the job, beating out Mike Glennon. Probably a smart move for them to kind of give him as many reps as you can, because the reps, what you're getting out of Glennon. He's kind of just holding it, there for the next guy. Nathan Cottrell, just like I just mentioned with Tremon Smith, kid, all-purpose kid from Georgia Tech, who now, when you get him out of that Georgia Tech style offense, could be a real interesting all-purpose type guy. Trey Quinn, back together, with Jay Gruden, is a kid that was at LSU, transferred to SMU, has a lot of that, slot receiver skill set, just has to stay healthy, in order to get himself, a better look. Joe Giles Harris, good kid in terms of you got an injury and you got to start that guy, into your lineup for special teams and knowing the defense. You mentioned it, Karon Reed has had some really good training camps, never been able to put it all together, in the regular season. And the Titans, they basically put guys at every position here who can help them in an emergency. Simeon, you mentioned, Jeremy McNichols has played. Great story. We know the story of David Quisenberry and what he's come back from lymphoma. Kobe Smith, who made it, South Carolina D tackle. So, that's their kind of bread and butter. Jamal Davis and Wyatt Ray as potential pass rushers, off the bench there. Kareem Moore played well when given a chance. And then Ty Smith is a kid, again, from Towson State, who's been one of their best guys in one-on-ones the last 3 years ago in a camp there. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy. But, the Titans track, and the Colts really track with good practice rosters to help them in a COVID season. And I think that's where the division comes down to. And I mentioned the Ravens-Browns game. Thursday night's game will be a huge decision maker for one of those two teams, and that is no one will say anything if it's a shootout, 42-38, Texans win. The Chiefs will just move along, and that'll be one game, and they'll just move along. If this is anything other than a Texans win, it will start the build-up again as normal in the beginning of each season with the Texans, that all the hype and all the possibilities getting immediately, put under the microscope. And you mentioned it. This is now all on the factor that the Texans have pushed all their chips in on Bill O'Brien, and literally anybody who he doesn't like, doesn't get along with, or disagrees with him has been moved out of the organization. So there's really not a lot of room left if this doesn't, get offshore. And I would make sure that prior to Thursday night, you make sure, Bill O'Brien, that you make sure you better up the anchor before you try to take off, because everybody has to be on board with how you're doing this. And if that's the truth and you've cut everybody else out because it was your way or the highway, well, now your way has to start working, and it has to start working Thursday night, because that fan base and the factor that, the local and national media has jumped on board with the Texans being that team that it always starts off one way, but then they get there and then they disappoint you again at the finish line. You start looking, now that you paid Deshaun Watson, the next couple of years, there are going to be, like he mentioned when he made these moves, you can't pay everybody. Well, you paid the tackle, you paid Cunningham, and you've paid this quarterback. You got to start winning. You have to get past where they're projected to be, because all three of these teams could make the playoffs. But if you're still in that wild card scenario after all of this, I don't think that's where you had been building up to a crescendo. So for me, this division is, I just think the Colts and the Titans collectively are better in terms of organization, coaches, GM, and then depth. Texans are the wild card because, boy, some of those moves, they're either going to look like a genius with Cooks, Fuller, and David Johnson, and it's fantasy football, or you're going to be struggling again to get to that 9-10 wins. So I'm doubling down. The Colts may be fearful that both you and I somehow like the Colts, this year. But I think it's a three-man race.
Yeah.
And the race gets really interesting. Like, that's how funny it is. And you're making predictions, But if I knew the result of the game Thursday, that's how quickly you could have a difference of opinion of this division.
No doubt.
And one of these years, we're mentioning the Lions and some, the Redskins will get back and the Giants. That's all fun and games because we know where they're at. They're not expected. One of these years, the expectation is that you will be watching Super Bowl Sunday with a guy like Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt. Like, you're expecting them to get there one of these years, sooner or later. And so they're the type of team that if they went out there and they've spent the offseason, and this is a game when you knew you were up on Kansas City the way you were, this is your whole offseason right here with these guys again. Can you stop them? And then can you produce with the changes you made? Because this is all tied into them buying into 100% Bill O'Brien's, situation. And so if it works, you could run off 5 out of 7, or, you could run away early in this division if you could take a big W against the Chiefs on Thursday night.
I think Houston has a chance to win that game. They're like double-digit underdogs. We'll have our good friend Aaron Wilson on Thursday morning to preview that. We got 3 more divisions to cover. We're going to give you some bonus coverage here on the state of football. I'm going to dive right into the NFC South here. Kick it off. Atlanta Falcons, Kirk Benkert, the West Virginia signal caller, Kyle Lauletta out of Richmond, developmental guys there. Jawan Green out of Albany, Chris Rowland out of Tennessee State. Again, developmental players at the wide receiver position. Jared Pinkney, the tight end out of Vanderbilt, once considered a first-round pick, goes undrafted, stashed away on the Falcons practice squad. I do think he'll be called up at some point. Tyler Hall out of Wyoming. This is a feisty individual, undersized corner, really going to make a name for himself as a slot kind of nickel back in Atlanta, I believe. And then shout out that guy, one punter on my list, Cameron Nazilik, who I saw, maybe 3 or 4 years ago at Columbia. And I said, holy cow, this guy is just shot out of a cannon. He transferred to Georgia his final year, finds his way on Atlanta practice squad. Carolina, interesting. The roster turnover there with Coach Rule is incredible. They've got about 20 guys left over from last year's roster. That's how much they've turned that roster upside down. Running back Reggie Bonifant, center Sam Tecklenburg out of Baylor. He's very familiar with Rule from his days there. Bruce Hector, the defensive tackle who spent last season with the Eagles. Natrell Jamerson, the former Nebraska safety and East-West Shrine Game MVP. And last but certainly not least, one of the Hard Knocks stars, Clay Johnston, the linebacker. We saw so much time of him on the Hard Knocks, and the Rams really making a strong push to retain him on the practice squad. But Clay Johnston getting a call up from his old college coach, and Coach Rule saying, hey, we've got a spot for you over here in Carolina. So he goes from one coast back to the other. New Orleans, you'll see this is a veteran kind of predicament or guys that could step in and play. Benny Fowler, he's obviously had a handful of experience at wide receiver. Little Jordan Humphrey is a guy with upside. Jawan Johnston out of Oregon, transfer from Penn State. I really thought he was going to make this roster. Big 6'4", playmaking wide receiver. The Saints have hit on undrafted wideouts in the past. They've hit on running backs too. So Tony Jones Jr. out of Notre Dame, a guy to keep an eye on. And then the veterans come into play. That defensive line, you see a guy like Margus Hunt, Anthony, the former first-round pick, Anthony Chickalo, who's been on the active roster for the Steelers here. On the offensive line, Calvin Throckmorton, a guy who could play all 5 offensive line positions, really. And then Joe Bocci, we saw at Michigan State, some situation there where he didn't finish the season with the team. They roll the dice on a character risk there. Keith Washington, a big-bodied corner out of West Virginia, rounds out my New Orleans notables. Josh Rosen finds another home in Tampa Bay. He gets signed to the dream team down there that Bruce Arians is collecting. Raymond Calais, the first guy claimed on the waiver or on first practice squad signing, I should say, had the kick return there for a touchdown at the NFLPA Bowl. Josh Pearson, Jacksonville State wide receiver, another guy we had out in Pasadena. Zach Shackleford, the center out of Texas. Javon Hagan from Ohio, the free safety there. And Chappelle Russell, what a story. Two torn ACLs. He makes the practice squad there in Tampa Bay, and three linebackers out of Temple. Sam Franklin also making a practice squad. Sean Bradley making the Eagles 53-man roster, but 3 linebackers out of Temple making 53-man or practice squad. I am going to give this division to New Orleans. I think they are going to have the most wins. They are not, however, my Super Bowl prediction. We'll have that later on in the week. John, over to you for the NFC South.
Yeah, so the Falcons protect that quarterback. Not surprising. They liked what they saw out of Ben Kurt. Lauletta, continues to get, more shots at it. Chris Rowland, I thought he was a kind of an underrated, guy in terms of the production he had at Tennessee State. Can also give you, some good action in the return game. Pinckney, like you mentioned, at one time, much higher rated. Now is in a good opportunity there, considering they lost Austin Hooper. They'd look to develop, they kept 2 linemen that they know, and have some investment, especially John Wetzel. But then they added, Timon Paris, Stony Brook finest, out there, got picked up after 2 years on the Redskins. So Wetzel kind of gets bounced back down there. Edmund Robinson makes his way back to the NFL using the XFL to get there. Austin Edwards, good Ferris State looking prospect who I think, had he had a pro day, it's good to see him still land on a PR. We mentioned during the draft the number of smaller school or guys that, without without their pro day, without those opportunities, got overlooked. But you did still see a number of guys. We see Chris Rowland here. We see Austin Edwards, here. So you still see a number of young guys that got opportunities, to be put on PRs. Carolina, we know the number one thing Matt Rule has said is he wants, position versatility. Bonifant, former Louisville quarterback, converted to running back, can do a number of things there. Ishmael Hyman and Mark and Michelle, 2 kind of slot guys that also have a good amount of speed. Giovanni Ricci, a 195-pound wide receiver when he got to Western Michigan, now 245-pound pass-catching tight end. Austin Larkin has flashed a little bit as a pass rusher. Woodrow Hamilton and Bruce Hector, they're just good, solid football players. And the one thing you don't want to have with a young team is to be disheartened during the year. If your big dudes are out and you have teams that are just running the ball all over you, the way that could happen in their division, you don't want that to happen to you. So to have 2 young guys there that, are kind of journeymen at this stage, but, would plug in and be able to play well for you. Chris Orr, not surprising. He's a Texas-based kid. His dad, Terry Orr, played for the Redskins. Him and all of his brothers have played, college football all over Texas. So Chris Orr, probably somebody Chris Rule may have even looked at as a recruit during his time coaching in that in that state. Same thing with Natrell Jamerson, former draft pick of the Saints, and then a guy Carv Viedrich, not counting as a global, but a kid with a super leg. If he can ever get it all together, there would be a guy that actually has the leg to kick, punt, and kick off in the NFL. He's made made the rounds there. Saints are basically protecting, this season. They found an undrafted running back kind of on the regular, Tony Jones out of Notre Dame. Good spot there. Benny Fowler, the better special teams player. And then, Johnson and Humphrey have size that they want to continue to develop. Kind of shocking that they were able to get Tommy Stevens after all that post-draft talk between them and the Panthers. They sneak him through along with Garrett Griffin. John LeGlue comes back after being poached from their PR last year. He comes back. Cameron Tom, a versatile guy that can play center, guard, or tackle. And then they really like Joe Biaggi, there. And Keith Washington, his daddy, played at Louisiana Tech and kind of lives in Houston, used to live right around me. So nice to see his son make the PR, and literally a kid who had an interception almost on a regular basis. So not surprising he made the PR, only surprising that he didn't make the active roster. But they have veteran DBs, and they're just going to go down swinging, with their best roster. You mentioned Josh Rosen. I guess, Bruce Arians needed somebody to carry his hats and drive around the golf cart. So Josh Rosen's there for that. Not surprising that somebody would poach Raymond Calais off their PR, 4.4 or better, good all-purpose guy, and now playing with the Rams. It'll be interesting to see if they give him some actual run early on. Cyril Grayson, a great story, LSU kid that was a track and field guy turned football player, and this is probably the third or fourth practice roster he's made, mainly because the kid runs basically 4.3 on any track you'd ever put him on. So they did a good job there. Ledbetter, good kind of, journeyman presence off the D-line. And then Mazzy Wilkins has been a kid that I thought has had a couple of good camps, for them from South Florida. Gives them a versatile DB, there. But I think with Antonio Winfield and some of the guys that they've had there, if Carlton Davis can bounce back and be healthy, he's had some injury issues in training camp. That's really, to me, where the Bucks can close the gap here, with the Saints, is how well would their total defense play. But that back end has to start going from a lot of prospects and a lot of potential upside. It starts to happen to play on the field on game day. They got to be able to just make one or two stops, because it would appear offensively they'll score, but will they be able to stop anybody?
So it sounds like you're going with the Saints.
There's no doubt.
All right. It'll get interesting when we get to our Super Bowl predictions for sure. We keep it moving. We keep it growing. What kind of bonus coverage? Who else is breaking down the practice squads like this? NFL Draft Bible's doing it. That too. Make sure you go check them out. They got some good people over there, including John Murphy and Rick Saratella, coming into your living room here on this Labor Day. Did we tell you Happy Labor Day? God bless America. And we have two more divisions as we move out west, John, to the AFC West and the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. I'll start right there. Matt Moore, I mean, what can I say? The guy has 9 lives. The importance of a veteran quarterback, especially on your practice squad, very valuable. Jordan Tiama also, I think he was floating around there in the Alliance League or XFL. Garrick Dieter, the former Bama wideout. Maurice French, the Pittsburgh wideout, who I think is more of a special teams guy there. Kalijah Lipscomb, we talked about Pinckney. Lipscomb also at one point considered to be a potential first-round guy. He had the highest grade of the Blesto National 2 years ago. And then shout out to our defensive end, Tim Ward, for Kansas City. Denver Broncos, Brett Rippon remains on the practice squad at quarterback. Levante Bellamy, the Western Michigan running back who suffered an injury out there at the Combine. Good to see him find some grounding there. Darren Paulo, the offensive tackle from Utah, probably can't cut it on the outside at the next level. We'll have to kick inside. Can they develop and groom him as an interior offensive lineman? That remains to be seen. Derek Tuska, the North Dakota State pass rusher there, had a great week of practice at the East-West Shrine game. I think that's a young man that could eventually get a call up there. And Elijah Holder, I mean, you want a feel-good story. This guy's been through so much adversity from the medical and all the different types of surgeries coming out of Stanford. Good to see Elijah Holder hold on to his aspirations of being a pro football player. Los Angeles Chargers, you know, we've seen so much of this team on Hard Knocks. I'll just say that Brandon Fihoko, Coach Lynn, you didn't live up to your word. I thought he made the roster off of the dance. You know, he gets stashed on the practice squad. That is Fihoko, the nose tackle. Cole Christensen, shout out to our military here on Labor Day. And he goes from Army over to the West Coast stash on the Chargers. And then the Las Vegas Raiders, John, they are going to be my prediction here to win the division. Theo Riddick at running back, the veteran there. Keelan Doss out of UC Davis. You know, here's a guy that was self-rewarding, Nick Bowers, because, you know, I've told anyone who would listen, I mean, even scouts in the Northeast here on the scouting trails, did you see the kid from Penn State, Bowers? Did you see Bowers? I'm trying to tell anyone who listen, never heard of him, wasn't on my list, didn't check him out, don't know anything about him. I go to Penn State, and you know, Coach Franklin is just raving about this kid. Long story short, he's been injured, you know, his first 3 years, comes back as a team captain. I think this past year was the backup to Baby Gronk and Fryermouth. But Bowers is a guy, you can use him in motion, you can use him as an H-back, you can use him as a fullback. He's not going to hurt you in the pass-catching game. Oh, by the way, the guy's like a rocket scientist. I wasn't even sure if he was even interested in playing pro football. But, hey, a little Brooklyn brawler, pat on the back here. I just got to say, Nick Bowers, nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody even heard of the guy. It's just rewarding to see him on the practice squad here for the Las Vegas Raiders. And shout out to Mike Mayock, because this guy's, despite the fact that he's on that GM role, I see this guy. I'm on the West Coast. He's at the games. I'm on the East Coast. He's at the games. I mean, I've never seen a GM, honestly, hit the road more than Mike Mayock. I'm just being honest. Kamal Seymour. Oh, by the way, I'm at the Rutgers game against Michigan State. Who do I see? Mike Mayock. No surprise, Kamal Seymour winds up on the oh, by the way, a Fordham guy, Dylan Mabin. Who do I see? Mike Mayock strikes again. Madre Harper. Here's a guy that I know our good friend Russ Landy was asking me not to mention because he was trying to sneak him up to Canada at one point. But, you know, the Raiders, to me, John, it's a make or break season in Las Vegas. It's the anointment of a new era. It's a new stadium. It's a new look. It's a new feel. And, oh, by the way, it's a new division winner. I'll just leave that right there. The Las Vegas Raiders, my prediction to take the AFC West. Over to you.
Well, looking at top to bottom there, the Broncos going, keeping a quarterback that knows the system. May not be a guy that they think can develop past being that guy, but Brett Ripien definitely knew the system. They really were impressed by him last year in training camp. They double down on the running backs. Levante Bellamy, more of an all-purpose guy. Jeremy Cox from Old Dominion. If you didn't know that kid was from Old Dominion, and you saw him on the hoof and saw his pro day workout, you would think that was a kid coming out of the ACC or SEC. Trinity Benson, really good speed, and not knowing if KJ Hamler is going to be full ready to go early in the year, gives them kind of a substitute for that type guy. Paolo and Rogers, I mean, Jake Rogers is another one. He's a survivor, and not because he listens to Beyonce. That kid just makes a roster all the time. Why? He can play left and right tackle, and maybe that's the best thing that he does. But if he ever has to dress, he's going to be able to get you out of an emergency situation, and you see him every year. And Paolo could be a similar type kid down the road. Had an injury early in training camp, ended up with a injury release, I think it was here actually with the Saints, and then made his way out there. Patrick Morris, we've seen him, undersized Texas A&M center. Deshaun Williams, who was initially signed with the Calgary Stampeders, got released with the opt-out and makes it, back with the Broncos, the team he was with. Devontae Bosby, another kid who has played well when given an opportunity, and P.J. Locke. They have a lot of good, sound football players, and the Broncos are hoping, with Drew Lock there, that they're playing meaningful football games in November and December. Kansas City kept both a developmental quarterback, and their veteran number 3. Same with DeAndre Washington. Same with 2 developmental receivers, and Garrick Dieter, who's learned their scheme and could be productive if given a chance. 2 really good athletic linebackers in Omari Cobb and Darius Harris. You mentioned Tim Ward, the other Old Dominion pass rusher, who they held on to through an injury last year. And Chris Lamons, a kid who's kind of bounced around from South Carolina as a cover guy. They've been able to do a good job of locating undrafted cover guys and turning them into players, and he might be the next one. You mentioned the Raiders have a really good-looking group of guys there. Riddick has played a bunch of football. Keelan Doss, has surprised. Nick Bowers, great story. Won the Tim Shaw, I think it's like the Tim Shaw Spirit Award, for overcoming things and what he did there at Penn State. And you got to look back. I mean, he was a top 15 recruit at the tight end position coming into college. Penn State is a school that heavily recruits that position. So he's a kid over time that could be an interesting guy. Seymour, you mentioned, good developmental offensive lineman. Magnuson is a kid who's bounced around that they know of. And then defensively and special teams, they did an excellent job of being able to get some guys, Datrone Jones and Chris Smith, 2 veteran guys that could fill in and substitute. Kyle Emanuel gives you a really good teamer. Javin White had, a really good camp, but they have some depth there, and they made some moves at the linebacker spot. Won't be surprising to see him get active. And then Dylan Mabin and Mondre Harper, 2 developmental corners. They've let some guys go, so either or both of them will get a chance. And another guy, Derek Eberle, doesn't qualify as a global, but a kid that was born and raised overseas and then went there to Utah State, has a really good leg as a kicker. We saw with San Diego, Darius Bradwell, he's going to get some extra time to get himself in shape. Downhill runner from Tulane. You mentioned Cole Christensen. Tyron Johnson's won pound for pound as fast as any receiver in the league, was a top 5 receiver coming out of high school at LSU, then transferred to Oklahoma State. He is a kid that a lot of teams have kept their eye on. Cole Toner gives you good versatility as an O-lineman. Jesse Lemonier, we like him as a pass rusher. You saw what Fehoko did at times. I think he fits their scheme, and obviously is a guy that they want. And Quentin Meeks, I think, is a good guy that has a shot, to play as a teamer and a backup safety early on. This is a really interesting division. I still think there's just too much, on Kansas City. Again, I'm not expecting Kansas City to, beside win the division, but I'm not expecting Kansas City to do it with as many wins as what people are expecting. I don't expect this to be a 14-2, just blowout. But I think the problem for anyone else, including the Raiders, to me is the last place. This could suddenly morph into becoming a very good division overall. Denver drafted a lot of people, and if they definitely hit on Drew Lock, and if Bradley Chubb can come back, and Von Miller plays up to his ability, suddenly they're a better team than they were. We're enamored with Anthony Lynn, no kidding, and what they can do. And I think they'll be a much more solid team across the board, in terms of production value for their guys. Their biggest thing is the injuries and how well offensively can they play week in and week out against better defenses. And then I think the Raiders have a lot of interesting parts there. The one thing that hasn't happened yet, which I thought would have or could have, is that as much as it would have been a detriment to Carr's career, it really looked like for a long time there that the Mariota thing was going to be a match made in heaven. And whether it's because they're protecting how he's not performed in camp or he legitimately has been banged up, you haven't really heard too much out of Mariota, in terms of what he's doing, or is this a Ryan Tannehill, 2.0 scenario. But the one thing you have to say is Carr gets a lot of ribbing, for not being as good a quarterback as people think. He still completed 70% of his passes, and he has still played with a lot of things going on, there, the coaching staff, the change of philosophy in players, changing cities, on the fly in all of this for him. So it is a make or break year, especially for him. But, they've changed that roster. They have a great young running back. They've made a lot of improvements on the defensive side of the ball. I think the hardest thing for anybody to catch the Chiefs is there's no easy victories in that division this year. There's nobody to just walk over and say, I got those two, and now I just have to hope for a split with Kansas City. So I still got the Chiefs winning it, but I think it's a much better division. And any of those three other teams could be the surprise team. So,
Sure.
Picking the Raiders, not, in Vegas, that's not a shocking move.
Well, I think, you will see two playoff teams, at least from this division, and I'm expecting David Carr to take the eye mascara off and put that chip on his shoulder and carry it around. All my love for the Raiders, I forgot to mention my guy, Jaylen White, out of UNLV there, who, from my understanding, outplayed third-round pick Tanner Muse, but because third-round picks are heavily invested, luckily for Javon White, not so luckily for Tanner Muse. Muse gets hurt, White gets the call, and I expect him to be called up to that 53-man roster very quickly there. All right, final division. John, I may have another surprise for you. Obviously, San Francisco is the favorites here. They keep JaMychal Hasty, the running back out of Baylor. Jawan Jennings, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. There was a lot of love for him leading up to the draft. Darian Daniels, the transfer who finished up at Nebraska. I think he started off at Oregon State. Deion Jordan. This is where things get interesting, John. The 49ers have Deion Jordan, Jonathan Cyprien, and Kevin White, all at one point very high draft picks. Now they find themselves on the San Francisco practice squad. So the 49ers, they probably have more depth than anybody when it comes to the practice squad, at least. Seattle, I would say, is, in most people's opinion, right there, neck and neck with the 49ers. They keep Chad Whaler, who was just a human turnstile there with the Giants, undrafted out of USC. I like him as a practice squad guy. I didn't like him as a starting tackle for the Giants. Danny Etling finds his way in Seattle. Aaron Fuller, who ran really crisp, good routes there at Washington, the wide receiver. Penny Hart, I think it's West Georgia again, or Georgia State, one of those schools, highly rated at one point. Lance Lenore, Western Illinois, former high school teammate of Laquan Treadwell. Funny how they're in a similar situation. Tyler Mabry, the tight end there, Buffalo, Maryland, just long arms. I mean, his catch radius is so big. And then Shaquem Griffin, maybe the one of the bigger surprises of cut day, finds his way back in Seattle on the practice squad. Arizona, Bryce Perkins of Virginia makes his way on the practice squad. J.J. Koski, a very good-looking wide receiver out of Cal Poly. Again, a crisp route runner, underrated speed there. Jamal Demby out of Maine. I love this dude. I mean, he was just throwing dudes out of the club. At the All-Star game, I saw him several years back and just was enamored with him. I think it might have been at the NFLPA Bowl, as a matter of fact. Daniel Batuli, shout out to our guy Von Hutchins, who loves Batuli, the Tennessee linebacker. I think this is a guy that eventually gets called up, as does Christian Roseboom, who I was hearing late into the cut day, John. I thought there was whispers that Roseboom might actually make the 53-man roster. So they've done themselves well there in stashing Batuli and Roseboom. I'm not sure if they'll be able to keep both of those guys stashed on their practice squad. And then a couple of undersized corners in Dante Dion and Juju Hughes, both of whom have got some play there at the Hard Knocks. Going over to Arizona, running back DJ Foster, running back Jonathan Ward, Rutgers shout out here, Andre Patton, wide receiver, kick returner JoJo Ward, linebacker Evan Weaver, remember him? He finds his way on the Cardinals practice squad. Jace Whitaker out of Arizona is a guy, just really small, skinny looking dude, but man, he's a heck of an athlete. I love his versatility too. I think he could, probably be overmatched to play outside corner, but could play slot, could play both safety positions. I like that kid, Jace Whitaker. And Arizona, there's a lot of upsets in the West. It's like a great Western movie, John. To me, I think Seattle, San Francisco could very easily win this division. I am just really excited what Arizona has done here. I think Chase Edmonds is going to play a bigger role than you think there. They've got playmakers at the wide receiver position. They've got a really good looking quarterback. They've improved the offensive line. To me, Arizona is my darlings here in the NFC West. I'm going with the Cardinals. And just like the AFC West, I think you could say the same about the NFC West, where San Francisco obviously is going to be the favorite because they were in the Super Bowl. But if you told me the Cardinals or the Seahawks won this division, it's amazing how far the Rams have fallen off here since their Super Bowl appearance. But again, the Wild Wild West, this is wide open.
Yeah, this is a division that a lot of people have paid, obviously, a lot of attention to. Every one of these teams, has won or has, now a chance, to be back in the mix here. So exciting, there. You saw Arizona, some of it was going with the known, DJ Foster, he brings Dylan Cantrell, who had a serious injury, back, and now they're converting him to be kind of a hybrid wide receiver, kind of H-back tight end, type role. So that's kind of a interesting, development there. Coda Martin, Syracuse kid that can play pretty much anywhere across the line, but good, reserve guard tackle. And then they back themselves up pretty much everywhere defensively. Bullard, and Cooley, you get an inside guy and an outside guy. Evan Weaver, Reggie Walker, good special teamer. Chris Jones as a good special teamer. You mentioned Whitaker as a cover guy. And Kentrell Bryce, who's an excellent special teamer. Just, he's kind of an in-between strong safety, nickel backer, type guy there. Keep, Bryce Perkins. They keep J.J. Koski, even though he may have a similar photo to, coach, our favorite New York Jets coach. He may have the worst photo in college football from last year. A little too excited, a little too much caffeine there for J.J. Koski on the morning of the photo, but hey, we'll give him a break. Sad to see that he beat out Edwards for that job, on the practice roster as kind of that slot, all-purpose, type guy, the main receiver returner. I think he was a kid that, his best opportunity would have been them having preseason games, but won't be surprising for somebody to give him another 90-man shot. You mentioned Demby and Cabral. Cabral was a tackle converted to center. So a lot of teams you saw, protect their third center. They kept Jonah Williams as a pass rusher. Here's an interesting thing. This is a team that really, invested a lot of time in researching guys at a lot of different levels. They get the Brown kid, Michael Hock, who supposedly ran sub 4.8, at 300 pounds and is a Canadian by birth. So, they did a lot of work on him. Batuli and Rosenbaum, I loved Rosenbaum from what I saw in his film there. And a last-minute addition, Mr. Derek Moncrief, so you can take Nick Bowers. I'll take Derek Moncrief, as we had signed Derek Moncrief after finding him at an open tryout, which amazingly, he was the other guy showing up at the open tryout because we were working out Jordan Burton, who was a standout at Oklahoma State, and one of our scouts, Cliff Clark, his son had gone to high school with Derek Moncrief and said, hey, Derek is the other guy, and is related to Deontay Moncrief. Why don't we have him drive over and just tell me what you think of him? And Derek had actually a better workout than Jordan Burton, ended up getting signed and came off of a all-star season for the Saskatchewan Roughriders last year, was initially with the Oakland Raiders. When they were Oakland, he was signed by them. Vegas Raiders, decide that they've made a number of moves at that spot. Most notably was signing, Demarius Randall and then still having Eric Harris under contract. So last-minute workouts because of the COVID, and Derek Moncrief ends up back in Los Angeles, but this time with the Rams. So kind of a very interesting storyline there to see. And we noticed Deontay Dion, a guy they really like, and Juju Hughes, who made a number of plays, in the preseason in terms of the practices that we were watching. The Niners have some interesting guys. JaMychal Hasty, a lot of speed, a lot of versatility out of the backfield there. Kevin White, minus the COVID. I mean, Kevin White's probably the only person who's enjoying the COVID, because there is not a shot in hell that this kid was getting another shot in the NFL without this COVID coming around and teams looking at these veteran guys. I mean, he was gone. That was a throwback. Even though he's not that old, for him to get on there, that's a ton of credit for Kevin White to have stayed in shape that long to be able to make, the most of an opportunity, even as far-fetched as this one is. I mean, that's a great, he may never catch a ball. He may go down as being a bust as a first-round pick, but, all the kudos in the world to Kevin White and to his agent for keeping that kid's head above water for that amount of time to be away from the game, especially as a wide receiver, and then make a showing. Dakota Shepley, another kid who makes it because the CFL has the shutdown. UBC kid, highly athletic. They'll try him as a guard. Great to see William Sweet, really good kid. Worked hard in North Carolina and has some real upside as an offensive tackle thanks to his length. You mentioned Dion Jordan. They keep him and Darion Daniels. They double down in the secondary as well, and guys that can play on special teams. So the Niners expecting to play a lot of football. And then here's the club. I guess that'll let my angle out for the AFC NFC West. So they keep Chad Wheeler and Tommy Champion. Hopefully Tommy Champion can kind of get his head on straight. If he does, him and Wheeler, are two really good upside offensive tackles on a practice roster. You mentioned Penny Hart. He has good chance as an all-purpose dude. Fuller, just a really good, solid possession-type receiver. Stephen Sullivan as an undersized pass-catching tight end from LSU, but an extraordinary athlete, NBA-type athleticism, in terms of vertical and shuttles and stuff like that for a guy of his body type. And here we go. We mentioned Wagner. Well, now Stony Brook gets in the books with two guys as well. So 3 guys from Wagner, 2 guys from Stony Brook, making it there. So it must be something in that water out there. Big Daddy must be, getting these guys at Wagner and Stony Brook hydrated properly and all this. Another kid, Jason Stanley, a Georgia kid, fantastic all-around athlete that's played both wide receiver and DB. So that they like bigger guys. They like athletic ability out there. And then a shrewd move keeping Danny Etling around. And here's why. Garoppolo, he moves around the pocket. We all know Kyler Murray does. And you've got other teams in the division and in the NFL that are using that motion offense in terms of having their quarterback get out of the pocket. Etling's a kid with a lot of athletic ability that you could move around. And I think a guy in practice, yes, he is listed as a quarterback, but has taken some reps at some other spots. So, good to see him, keeping a job, and a guy that has bounced around because he can learn your offense as a quarterback, but then he can also be a super sub during practice. And I think that's something that you're looking for. I think I have Seattle in a tough race here, winning this division. Pete Carroll, to me, I like what San Diego has, in their coaching staff and how they've done it. Pete Carroll might be the ultimate COVID coach, in terms of how he keeps these guys loose, how he's a consistent winner, right? 133-90, in the NFL, 83-19, as a college coach. So we know one thing, Pete Carroll wins, and he's been able to do it in the diversity of doing it at the college level and all the things that throws at you. He's done it at the NFL level, changing them from a run game to a passing team, to a man cover team, to a zone cover team, pass rush, no pass rush. I think they have a number of guys on both sides of the ball that can get them winning games in a number of different ways. I'm agreeing with you that Arizona is a team that will make a move forward, and I think the Rams have kind of fizzled, there. To me, the team that's a question mark for me is I still want to see how the Niners bounce back from this, and I think the gap is the Niners and the Cardinals, and then Seattle kind of sliding between the two of them for the W, at the finish line. But those 3 teams, I think, are battling for playoff spots. And then the second, third place team there, the Vikings, Packers, team, and between Tampa and the Falcons are, where do you get that other wild card team out of there unless the Eagles' issues defensively are shored up and their O-line at left tackle between Howie Roseman, and Jason Peters negotiate a way for him to play left tackle, at some point for them. But I think this is a division, like you mentioned, that it's starting to go Arizona's way, but we have to see it work first. but they have the most potential and they are the most exciting team. But to me, Pete Carroll in the COVID stuff, with everything that's possibility to have to change, he just seems to have that ebb and flow where you get him and Russell Wilson and a good defense, and Jamal Adams added to the mix and some exciting young pass rushers, that they drafted. That's a club to me that they run the football. They don't often hurt themselves. And if they get continued good O-line play, that's a team I could see winning 10 or 11 games.
All right. Brought you 2 hours of power here. Just to recap our division predictions, we'll bring you Super Bowl predictions later in the week. AFC East, I like the Pats. John likes the Bills. NFC East, we both like the Cowboys. AFC North, we both like the Ravens. NFC North, we both like the Vikings. AFC South, we both like the Colts. NFC South, I didn't realize we agreed so much. We both like the Saints. And then the West gets interesting where I like the Raiders. John likes the Chiefs. I like the Cardinals. John likes the Seahawks. Man, what a great show. So much information crammed into 2 hours. We just recapped all 32 practice squads. Nobody does it like the NFL Draft Bible. Oh, by the way, we've got our most star-studded show lined up tomorrow, John. We have Ryan Roberts. We have Dane Brugler, Adrian Terzoli, Cam Gill, and oh, by the way, John Murphy will be joining myself, just like we do each and every weekday here on this Labor Day edition of the State of Football, Part 25. Put a ribbon on it, Johnny.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing you got to say to these guys is, there's a lot more veteran presence on the practice rosters. It'll be interesting. We've seen with the draft how the NFL has come back and said they want to keep a lot of the draft, things in that that they learned and that they added, to the draft this year. It'll be very interesting to see if this extended PR works, how much teams will think this might be a better plan long-term, to have more guys around, develop more of your own guys. But I think in future years, you would see the ages of the practice roster, come down. So, if you're one of those kids who unfortunately, didn't make it into camp or didn't get as much of a run here, or you don't see yourself initially on one of these practice rosters, I would say this is the time to not, give up, not a time to, to kind of resort to plan B just yet. Double down on that workouts, double down on staying, connected to what you're doing, because now is going to be the time where you're going to have to live a boring life and make sure you can pass a COVID test immediately to get on a practice roster. But also you can't be that guy that took a week or two off and felt sorry for yourself, because these teams are going to have to make movements. Game 1 is on Thursday, a whole weekend full of games. Injuries are going to happen, and spots on a 16-man practice roster are meaning that you're going to have a shot to go back to the team you were with, or hopefully have a scout, bang the table for you. As we mentioned, there's clearly some scouts in some areas, where teams trust their guys, and that's led to a number of young guys getting shots on PRs. So I would say, hey, double down on your workouts. Don't kind of let what happened, with the COVID upset, your destination. Because you see a lot of guys, that it's not always their first or second crack at it, that they make it, and a lot of good stories. So congratulations to those guys. But, if not, your first thing today should be to, get a workout in and then contact Marvin Jones and get your name, on our list. Make sure you have as many people trying to get the name, and your workout and your product out there as possible.
No doubt, some great advice there from John Murphy. The good news is it's officially the first week of the NFL season. There will be NFL action every weekend between now and Valentine's Day. The better news is John and myself will be back at it again tomorrow on another edition of the State of Football, each and every weekday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for following along and sharing and commenting, and we'll do a better job to work in the questions and smooth out that wrinkle there. But till tomorrow, everybody.